Welcome back to another episode of Bridges, where we are helping to bridge the divide between marketing and finance. And today we are putting into practice 8 episodes of learning to help solve what I believe is the hardest problem facing e-commerce brands today. If you are a store owner or a marketer or someone in finance who is inside of a brand that has experienced any year-over-year revenue decline in the last 2 years, this episode is for you. And of course, it's brought to you by not only myself, Taylor Holiday, CEO of Common Thread Collective, but also my amazing partners at Wayflyer and Finaloop, who are going to play a critical role today in helping us get out of this hole. As I scroll through these next few slides, I just want you to look at all of these graphs. Notice anything familiar? Anything that you may have been experiencing? This is the story that many brands in the e-commerce world are facing. It's not the 1% of brands, the ones that maybe you're seeing on the podcast or following on Twitter, but it is most of us. And I say us because it's my story too. At CTC, our agency mimics the growth of the industry in total. Like many of you, we walked alongside this massive ramp up in growth alongside 2020 when COVID created a huge tailwind for our industry, where there was suddenly tons of available capital, as well as tons of brands looking to grow and create value in what was a crazy black swan event. But as we reached the end of 2022, as iOS 14 showed up, the reality is that we took the same step backwards that you saw in many of those graphs. Growth that was increasing at a rapid pace suddenly stalled. All 3 financial docs under pressure. The balance sheet has too much inventory, maybe even some debt. Cash is deteriorating. The P&L shows shrinking revenue, rising costs, and negative EBITDA. You are likely out beyond the marginal frontier on your ad spend, forced to consider laying people off, reset the business, and it requires a combination of courage and conviction in the midst of this failure. It's ego death, I can tell you, and uncertainty all mixed together in a pot. And so if that resonates with if that's any of your lived reality in this moment, we're going to use this relationship between marketing and finance, this bridges structure, help you build a roadmap out. Because in many cases, I see well-intentioned people in these 2 departments, marketing and finance, making choices that actually create complicity in the perpetuation of the problem. Let's dive in. Here is how to avoid being complicit in the future decline of your business and to guide your organization out of declining revenue coming off of a period of extreme growth. And it starts, as many of these conversations do, at the overlap of marketing and finance. This is where it is critical for the 2 of you. I hope you're watching this together if you're inside of an organization that is experiencing this problem, because you cannot do it without one another. You will not have the sufficient information in order to solve this problem if you do not collaborate between these 2 departments. To start, we're going to begin back again to this principle of 4-quarter accounting to think about how we must both financially engineer this process as well as market and effort our way towards growth. Because this problem is complex. It involves issues of cash, the balance sheet, and the P&L all at the same time. And without insight and collaboration, we can't get there. So just quickly revisiting 4-quarter accounting, a way to look at your P&L through the composition of 4 core categories. CAC is about your ad spend. Cost of delivery are all the variable expenses associated with getting the product to your customer. Your OPEX are all fixed expenses, and your profit is obviously what's left over after all of that, which you're hoping to put into your pocket. Now, we call it 4-quarter accounting because at a balanced view, you could imagine all of these categories all representing 25% of your revenue. Now, as I've stated before, this is rarely the case. And if you're sitting here right now, it's probably because the profit category isn't where you want it to be. And in fact, it might be negative. And in this case, we're likely facing a negative profit despite revenue that might be way higher than periods of the time when you were more profitable. I remember a period in our business where we were well into the mid 8 figures, making less money than I made when we were at $5 million in revenue. And that feeling was extremely discouraging because it felt like we were doing so much more work to generate less value. And it likely at the point of this curve right here, where you've seen your business growing repeatedly, maybe there was a big trend burst from 2019 to 2021 saw a similar pattern. 22, it begins to crest, and 23, you took a small step backwards. Now, the problem with this small step backwards is that what tends to happen amidst a slight revenue decline is costs remain on a linear upwards curve to the right. One of the hardest things about e-commerce is that the expenses are not easily flexed. My business, alternatively, in a human services business, we can flex the cost, the primary cost is people, up and down relative to the revenue fairly easy. Now, there's an emotional and cultural expense to those kinds of decisions, but there's less risk of death. What I've seen is, as this decline begins to occur, there's often a continuing increase in the expense side that leads to a P&L composition that usually looks something like this at the start of the problem. So if we go back and we say, okay, at this point in this curve, let me go back, boom, boom. At this point right here, where we are now, this is what I usually see a P&L composition looking. You've got CAC somewhere in the neighborhood of 28 to 30%. Your gross margin is close to 50%. And part of that's because you've had to start selling things at discount more than you intended because you bought inventory on a projection that you've missed. So this cost of delivery is often a compression of margin through discounting is something that occurs here. And then this OPEX is an inflation of fixed costs against a similar premise. There was an expectation of future revenue that was greater, and so your fixed costs expanded on the basis of that future revenue that never showed up. And the end result is we're losing money. Okay? Both of these categories, commonalities that I see, where the margin is worse than anticipated, and this could be for a bunch of reasons, but it's often because we've had to discount excess inventory to create the cash we need to succeed, or we have increased what I like to call lifestyle inflation on the OPEX. We bought an expensive office. We got a giant warehouse. We had too many employees, a few too much travel or lunches, right? These kinds of things begin to inflate the expectations of how we live inside of the business. We've inflated our lifestyle beyond our means now that the revenue has declined. We have not reset that expectation yet. So amidst revenue declining, we're having experience. Profit is reaching a level that may not be long-term sustainable and threatens the livelihood in total. Now, when you reach this kind of moment, one of the things that becomes hyper critical is that you increase the level of access and data integrity and the rate at which you're able to get visibility into your closed financials. And this is why something like Finaloop is a critical partner in this process, because they give you real-time views of bookkeeping for D2C, multi-channel, wholesale, all of it. And so adding a tool like this into the process of reconciliation, even though it is a increased cost potentially in the short term relative to your present state, although it should save you money over your bookkeepers and everything else anyways. This helps to say, as part of a process of revitalizing and regrowing a declining business, we need to increase the level of visibility into the financial. And something like Finaloop can be a huge part of giving you that real-time access and visibility. I would recommend that as you begin this process, one of the first steps is getting into this tool. Okay, now, step one of the road out of declining revenue into future profit. The road out of declining revenue into future profit. Step one is about squeezing the sponge. This is a short-term lifeline. Okay, and why do we need a short-term lifeline? Because we have some expenses in the short term that we're going to accrue. And those expenses are mainly about right-sizing both the margin and the OPEX in order to get back to a place that we can survive. Now, it's really critical that this is the common step that everybody takes. Most people take this action, and this action involves basically trying to cut everything. Okay? Now, it's very intuitive to people to try and cut ad spend. It tends to be a large line item. And in the short term, this is often not wrong. This is a necessary component of the process. The danger begins when it lasts too long, okay? But step one is all about squeezing the sponge. And there's 3 specific parts to this process where we can begin to recomp the P&L to look more like this. Now, you'll notice, first step is reduce CAC, okay? Reduce CAC is going to be the first step in this process. Now, along the way, here's specifically the 3 things that we need to do during this first step. One is we have to reduce the ad spend to tightest attribution of first order profit. So we're going to look at every dollar we have. We're likely going to cut any top of funnel spend that is non-immediately attributing revenue on a click basis. Okay, that's what I want you to do. I want you to get rid of anything on YouTube or display or television. We're going to cut down to any channel reporting that can show us first order profitability on a click basis. You're going to cut everything else. Everything else goes. This is going to tighten your media budget down dramatically. Okay? Next, you're going to maximize your existing customer revenue for a period of time. Let's call this a 30-day execution strategy. Okay, it might take 2 months for you depending on where we're at relative to all the costs and the commitments. It may take a little longer than that. So stay with me on the timeline relative to your individual case. Maximizing existing customer revenue. How do we do that? We increase email send rate and we consider the promotion rate. Now, how promotional we need to be is going to be relative to how bad the balance sheet problem is and how much inventory we need to move and whether we're trying to generate just incremental revenue or if we're trying to generate cash. Because the real goal of this process is step 3, which is about right-sizing the OpEx and balance sheet. And this involves cutting down costs. Okay, so we are going to be eliminating fixed costs. This is likely going to be some human costs involved in this as well, and I empathize with that reality. And we're going to turn the balance sheet back into cash. Any inventory that has not moved or has been sitting beyond a normal cycle rate is going to attempt to be eliminated. So we're going to cut all of our ad spend. So you can see, again, marketing, finance, collaboration. Marketing's job to cut down ad spend to any non-click reported immediate revenue generation, first order profitability. So what is first order profitability, right? If I have 50% cost of delivery, I have to be better than 2-to-1 on a 7-day click. That's the step 1. Step 2 is increase the email send rate. If you're not sending every day, then you probably need to be in this period. Now, all sorts of caveats about the specific kind of business that you're in, whether you're in apparel or a consumable or you're selling furniture. There may be differences here all along the way, but we're going to maximize everything we can out of the existing customer. Number 3, we're going to start cutting. Now, here's an important question. How much do we need to cut? Well, here's the answer you're going to go seek out. You are going to go look at how much returning customer revenue you have generated year to date by month. And here's the exercise. This is really important. You are going to cut your OpEx below your existing customer contribution margin. And this relationship is something you're going to anchor into yourself forever. Is that your fixed costs in any given period of time should not exceed how much contribution margin you can expect off of your existing customer base. Remember, contribution margin equals revenue minus total cost of delivery minus any ad spend directly associated with generating returning customer revenue. So this is your retention spend, anything that's directly associated with that. That number, whatever's left over, that is the number that your OpEx has to operate against. This will ensure that you always have the ability to be profitable and survive. This is a metric that I call it's the lifeline relationship. It's the relationship between your existing customer revenue and your OpEx. If you maintain that in a healthy spot, it's going to allow us the opportunity, which is really important for the next critical step, which is to not depend creating new customer contribution margin in order to survive, because that will slow down growth and impede us from starting the new customer engine again. So marketing, finance, we have a job to do around the current CAC. We have a job to do around OpEx. We have a job to do around the balance sheet and the discount rate and the margin and all of these different profiles to get to a business that in step 1 is going to look more like this, to get to a period of profitability by lowering CAC. Now, the problem with this is that this strategy, oftentimes people get stuck here, is they never make it to step 2 because in the short term, that strategy is really going to work to make you profitable. Your MER is going to go up. All of a sudden, everybody's going to think we don't need all this ad spend, and you're going to be feeling great about the business. But you will die out of the process of a decreasing customer file that eventually you will squeeze all the value out of if you do not replenish the file by restarting the growth engine. And here's how this is going to happen. For the next long period of time, let's call this 3, 6, 9 months, we are going to be running a business that is basically break even. That's the goal. Whatever the threshold is of absolute survival, this is what we're doing in this period. And the way we're going to do it is by increasing our CAC, because now we are going to go aggressively after new customer acquisition to begin to grow the business once again. We're going to do it with our new lean OpEx because we just got way leaner in the business. And we're going to try and maintain improved margin by doing it absent discount. Okay? So what happens is as the percentage of revenue that comes from paid new customer acquisition increases, we're going to see the CAC or ACOS as a percentage of total revenue rise. And this is the number one area where brands get stuck into a stalled growth business, is that they hold an MER goal. They say, I have to be at a 4 or 5-to-1 MER in order to make the P&L work in this construct. And they lose sight of the fact that the growth has to come from an increase in the percentage of revenue coming from new customers. And if new customers are paid for, my ACoS is going to go up. So let's just imagine I have a business that has 50% returning customers and 50% new customer revenue. If I acquire half of the customers at a 2-to-1 ROAS, that means I'm paying 50% of the revenue for 50% of the customers. 50% of 50% is 25% ACoS, right? Now, if suddenly I try and ramp that up, and let's say 2-to-1 is profitable because I have a 45% cost of delivery. So every time I sell one of those customers, I actually make incremental contribution margin. Well, if I get to a place where 70% of my revenue is coming from a 2-to-1 ROAS, well, in that case, I'm going to have closer to a 35% cap, but I'm still going to be making more money. And so MER goals tend to be, or ACoS goals, which is average cost of sale or ad spend as a percentage of revenue. When you create constraints around that metric, you impede the growth of your business, period, full stop, especially in periods of decline. This is the number one thing I watch finance impose onto marketing that stalls a business out and prevents it from growing. Instead, we need immense clarity about the margin threshold. We need to make sure that OPEX is leaner than my returning customer contribution, and I need to acquire as many new customers as possible against that threshold. This is the key to restarting the growth engine. And this is where, now thinking about my other partner here, and you can see why we chose these partners, is because in this moment, you are likely going to need to find some way to finance this kind of objective. And there is no bank that is going to fund you on your TTM EBITDA because we are talking about declining growth and declining profitability. And so in this moment, you reach a place of desperation. Now, again, I want to caveat 1,000,000 times that it is so important that you understand the terms of this kind of money, that any revenue-based financing option or any financing option where the access to the capital is part of the value proposition is going to come with a corresponding risk factor that you have to consider into the calculation of the cost of the capital, and then therefore the corresponding CAC you need to use. And I'd love to talk to you about how to do that. But the point is that in these moments where your business is in decline, this is often one of the only options that exists for you, and it can be leveraged effectively with thoughtful consideration. So check out Wayflyer. This kind of funding is often a critical part of this process. And it's critical to understand here that if we are going to grow businesses, that new customer acquisition is the engine for growth. New customer acquisition is the engine for growth. That is how you expand the size of your customer file and you continue to grow your business. Now, there are cases for legacy giant retailers. I've worked inside of a few of them where they have millions of customers. And you may have 2 million customers that have lapsed over the course of 40-year history. That is a different scenario. I'm probably not talking to you here. But if you're an 8-figure e-commerce business, new customer acquisition is the engine for your future growth. And if you don't focus on every month solving for it, not just the short-term P&L, but the new customer growth, you will not solve the declining revenue. Because most of you have a business that looks like this. And this is a graph that I would encourage all of you to build. We call it the net active customer graph. This shows you in any given period of time, a bunch of different bars here. We have new customers acquired. That's this dark green. We have active returning customers. These are customers that have come back and purchased again while still in what we call the active customer range, which is the time between first and second purchases where 80% of customers are likely to purchase. I'm going to show you a graph on that in a second. The third is reactivated customers, customers that were lapsed that you have brought back to life. And the gray is active at risk. They didn't purchase in this period. They're still within the active window, but they're beginning to age out. And then the red is how many customers have churned. These are customers that have extended beyond that 80th percentile between first and second purchase where they have not made a second purchase. They likely are not coming back. And if you look at the relationship in what we call the net change between churn and new and reactivation, that indicates the growth or shrinking of your active customer file. And the size of your active customer file is the best predictor of future customer revenue. And you can see that many brands have this pattern where during the period of COVID and those massive run-ups, they grew their customer file a ton because they were growing new customer acquisition. And then what begins to happen is that new customer revenue declines. And now they reach a place where you can see here in January of 2024, if we go look at January of 2023 and January of 2022, we see a trend where the active customer file is declining year over year. That means that you can expect your existing customer revenue in that month to be lower than the previous year. That's the actual predictor. A lot of times brands confuse themselves that they think that because the total size of their customer file has grown, that they can expect increased existing customer revenue, and it's not true. You will actually see the business decline. And if you don't replenish the customer file in excess of the churn, your business will decrease in revenue over time. Fact, period, full stop. You have to restart the growth engine by increasing new customer acquisition. And in order to afford to do that, you need to have a lean OpEx so that your existing customer revenue can cover your expense, so you can be aggressive in new customer acquisition all the way up to the threshold of first order break even, likely. Right? Or small expectations of contribution, $5 an order, $3 an order, where you aren't depending on new customer contribution to cover the expenses of your business. This is the key to growth. This is the path out of your revenue. But don't also ignore your lapsed customers. So part of the process of going from restarting the growth engine, which is all about new customer acquisition, is to begin to realize that as a mature business, there are a bunch of customers that have lapsed. They have left you. They have not come back and purchased. And so we see this, the brands take this process as they reach the 20, 30, 40, $50 million range, where they begin to introduce a layer of marketing and messaging that's all about win back of lapsed customers. You will shorten your exclusion rates down to the active period. Usually it's around somewhere between 100 to 200 days for a lot of brands. And you'll begin to say, okay, anybody who has not repurchased within that long of a window, we need to go out and reactivate them with special tailored messaging. And this third layer of customers, most brands think about new and existing, but there's a third layer here. There's customers you once had that have now lapsed that are critical to activating against as well. And the easy way to look at this, Klaviyo has a report like this, Statless has a report like this. We look at a distribution of purchases between first and second, days between first and second purchase. So if you were to map all the purchases that occur between someone's first order and their second order, the average time between purchases is a distribution that looks like this. You can see what percentage of the customers purchase within 10 days, et cetera, et cetera. And what we define as the churned point is when they cross beyond the period at which 80% of people have purchased. So you can see by day, and this is my brand, Bamboo Earth, by day 109, if they have not purchased, we consider them churned. And for the sake of simplicity, we manually craft it as at risk at 30 days and churned at 100. And so each of those represents periods where we know that if the customer has exceeded has not purchased again within 100 days, they're likely coming back to purchase. And we need to message and think about them specifically. The end result of this and where we're headed, the vision, the better future is homeostasis. It's this world where CAC is at 20%, COD is at 45%. Maybe you can even move that down to 40% and get that CAC up to 25%. And you've maintained that lean, healthy OpEx at 20% to produce consistently 15% EBITDA outcomes over the next 2 years. If you can get to this goal over the next 18 months, 20 months, that is a really powerful place to be. Now, the best e-commerce businesses in the world with tons of organic demand and great margin, they can produce profits in the 25, 30%. I get it. But what we are talking about is getting back to health. We're talking about a process going from negative EBITDA to thinking about how you can get back to where you're going. So marketers, finance leaders, we have to think about how we merge together our two worlds to create a view and measure what matters. I would encourage you, I have a great YouTube video called The Hierarchy of Metrics. I would encourage you to sit down and watch it together and define for yourselves a clear hierarchy of metrics of the things you're going to look at together in this time. And there's 4 layers to the reporting that I would consider. Number 1 is contribution margin. It's this idea of the financial metric. And contribution margin in excess of OpEx equals profit. That's a simple way for you guys to think about and relate to one another. And I want my new customer contribution margin is going to be pretty close to 0 when we get to that growth phase. And that means my returning customer contribution needs to exceed OpEx. So I'm going to forecast that number. I'm going to keep an eye on it every single day. I'm going to make sure that I'm getting where I need to go. Number 2 are what I call the business metrics. Sales, spend, MER, AOV. I still want to have views into these things. Top line revenue growth matters. I get it. And we need to have visibility into them. Now, this third layer is what I call the customer metrics. And finance, I'm in particular speaking to you. You can't exclude these from your own consideration of reporting or you will miss what's happening in the future of the business. This is about LTV, new customer CAC, repeat rate, first order profitability, number of new customers. What is happening at the individual customer level and layer in my business at all times? And then finally, we have the channel metrics. In-platform click-based, ROAS, CPA, CPC, all those things that we care about, but they are subordinate to all the other 3. So how do we create and merge these worlds in a way that bring to life a relationship between marketing and finance that helps us through this process? First, we want to bring finance into the marketing dashboard. So as we've done with Statless, we put front and center contribution margin as the daily thing the organization is going to orient around. So every dashboard you have, if it doesn't have a financial measure, and I put out a tweet about this, I don't care if it's your Google Ads report, your Facebook report, or your primary BI dashboard, there's a financial measure that leads it. We're going to redefine the culture of the organization and the marketing efforts to be about creating financial outcomes. And now similarly, finance, you're going to walk the same route, which is you are going to bring marketing or key operating metrics into your finance dashboard. At the bottom of every P&L, we have these tables. 4-quarter accounting to look at the composition of the things we talk about. Are we creating the changes that we intended to at the layers of the business that we intended to? And then you're going to keep an eye on these key operating metrics. Total number of orders, new orders, returning orders, order revenue before taxes, AOV, AOV for new customers, AOV for returning customers, weighted average CAC, number of returns. These are the key operating metrics. I want this at the bottom of every P&L that I see. I want to see 4-quarter accounting breakdowns, and I want to see key operating metrics in every finance dashboard. Marketing leaders bring in finance metrics. Finance leaders bring in the marketing metrics and understand how the relationship between your two sides are critical to creating a path out. And last, I'll just leave you with this. If you feel discouraged by the decline in revenue, I know I did. When we at CTC, we went from north of $20 million in revenue down to 13.5 in 1 year. That's a big decline. It was a big step back. But since that time, we've reconstructed ourselves in a way that we are healthier than ever before. And sometimes I take solace in this trend. It's to realize that we all live through an extraordinary moment, a black swan event where much of this demand, everything that happened where our growth rate ballooned out beyond previous norms, wasn't really real. It was created by a global pandemic where literally every store on earth shut down. We can't have expectation that that reflects the actual TAM or opportunity in our business. And I would encourage you to go draw this straight line from 2018 to 2019. Go back as to where you started. Find the slope of that original line. And what I think I have found in many cases for people is that even with the declining revenue, that if you plot this point, all you've done is really just to continue to grow at the rate you set out to at the very beginning. And let that take comfort in what feels like going backwards. Because I know it did to me. Going from 200 employees down to substantially less, from big revenue numbers down to less. I know the feeling. Cool office down to remote. All the things that are required in this moment. They take courage. They take the ability to swallow your ego, get back into the numbers, and redefine the way you go about what you're doing. I hope this helps. It's not an easy problem, but you can